Rolling. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be starting promptly at the top of the hour, so until then, settle in. We'll see you back here in about 6 minutes. Hello once again. T-minus 5 minutes. Hello once again for those of you just joining. Welcome, and thanks for arriving early. While we wait to get started, please connect your audio and to make sure everything's working as it should be. We'll be getting started here at the top of the hour in about 4 minutes. All right, folks, almost ready to begin. We have about a minute left. Thanks again for your patience. Please stand by. We'll begin in about 30 seconds. All right, so we're ready to get started. Welcome, everyone, to our school garden workshop. We're thrilled to have you here tonight. Before we dive in with Alain D'Aoust, just a quick heads up that if you have any technical issues or questions, please send me a direct chat message using the Zoom chat. I'm Matt Leger, and I'll be your technical producer for tonight. Al has some incredible insights that you'll want to capture. Here's what we have planned for the next 2.5 hours. Al's going to take us through 4 comprehensive sections. These are full-scale modules that normally would be 12 hours of content on building educational garden programs. We have lots of Q&A sessions built throughout the session. We're also going to take an earthing break because we both feel that this is extremely important for people to step away from the computer and stretch the legs a bit. If you can, get your bare feet on the ground around 7:10 p.m. Eastern. Give us a chance to recharge before we finish the next leg of our event. Notice that those Q&A sessions, that's really where the real magic happens. So come prepared with your school garden questions. In addition to our agenda, we'll be providing a copy of the recording link today for anyone who couldn't attend or anybody that wants to review the content. We're also going to provide a copy of the presentation slides and your complete educational garden program toolkit, so stay tuned for that. And if you could please allow up to 24 hours after the event to receive the follow-up email, that would be fantastic. Let's quickly cover the tech basics because I know everybody wants to focus on the main presentation, and I do as well. So everyone today is muted here just to keep the background noise down, but we absolutely want to hear from you. Feel free to ask your questions. Just click the chat button and send your messages directly to me. Al's a regenerative systems expert, and this is your chance to tap into the knowledge he's bringing today. So we'll have Q&A breaks, as I said, after each section, plus we'll have a bigger discussion at the end where you'll be able to answer all of your questions. And again, if you have any technical issues or questions throughout today's presentation, please direct those directly to me. As your producer, I'll be standing by to field those questions. And now, folks, without further delay, our feature presentation, the moment you've all been waiting for. So join me in welcoming my good friend and business partner, Mr. Alain D'Aoust, who will now share his incredible educational school garden presentation with you. And the screen is yours, brother.
It is indeed incredible, but I do have to correct you, Matt. I'm no expert. I'm a mere generalist, forever student, never an expert.
Thanks for the correction.
All right. Welcome, folks. Thanks for joining. This is an intimate session and on purpose because I wanted to make sure that we could answer questions, but also I wanted to make sure that the quality of our audience was really good because the intention here is to arm people with the power to inspire and educate youth using the garden as a learning tool. There's a lot of content out there on gardening, growing food, how to compost, how to grow vegetables, how to build your garden. This isn't that. This 2.5 hour workshop is about speed running from 0 to 1 an educational garden program. And I'm going to talk about exactly what I mean by an educational garden program. I'm going to go through some of the principles that make up an educational garden program and distinguish them from other things. I'm going to go through how to build your garden program, how to facilitate workshops for youth using the garden as a learning tool. And then I'm going to talk about what you do during the summer. If you're a teacher, for example, I'm going to talk about how you go about managing and coordinating the entire program as a whole. If you're a parent, a homeschooling parent like I am, a father of 3 children, a youth worker, or somebody who's just really motivated to do so in their community, you're going to get a ton out of this. And I do mean a ton. There's a lot of information. As Matt alluded to, this was previously a 12-hour course that I've tried my best to condense to 2.5 hours. I suspect there's going to be some questions. I suspect there's going to be some follow-up. And I suspect if there's enough interest that there may even be a part 2 where we can expand further. But for now, what I wanted to do is give a crash course to educators as we approach the school year. This is a great time to start thinking about the garden. It's counterintuitive because most people will start talking about the garden in spring. And we're the fall or late summer, rather. So, why are we talking about a garden now? The reason we're talking about it now is, first of all, for anybody, fall is the best time to start planting a garden because you can get a lot prepared for the growing season that follows in winter if you're in the northern hemisphere, right? But also because the school is starting. Everybody's getting into that learning atmosphere. There's a vibration in the air, right? For better or worse, going back to school. Now is a great time to start thinking about how am I going to revolutionize my educational year with the garden? How am I going to integrate the garden into my curriculum, into my delivery, into my children's or the youth that I work with experience this year? And that's what this entire workshop is about. So I'm going to cover a lot of stuff. Okay. So I'm calling this workshop Building an Educational Garden Program. And as Matt alluded to, it's in four parts. In the part one, we're going to talk about the garden as a learning tool. And then we're going to go through and we'll talk about the other parts as we move on. We're going to go through all of those things that I talked about earlier. So we're going to do one part at a time. I'm going to try to keep each one within 30 minutes or so. We're going to pause after every 30 minutes for a bio break, for any quick questions that are relevant to the content that we just covered. And don't worry, towards the end, we're going to have plenty of time to ask general questions. You can ask me anything as it pertains to gardening or as it pertains to building an educational garden program. I'll speak as best as I can to my experience. And if I don't know the answer, I'll be honest about that too. Before we get started, I should probably introduce myself a little bit. My name is Alain D'Aoust, and I am a generalist, but I'm an ecological generalist. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm Matt's business partner, and we focus a lot on education. But throughout my career, my focus has been on regenerative education. So what does that mean? It means that I've spent the last 15 years being incredibly passionate about food production, ecology, and the intersection of the two, as well as human health, right? Now, I'm a father of three children, so a lot of what drives me is my children and youth. I spent my entire career, my 20s and most of my 30s, working with youth in an educational setting, both youth, adults, families, etc. Within the nonprofit sector, I've built over a dozen school garden programs in public schools. I've also built educational garden programs in youth centers like the Boys and Girls Club, after school programs, community garden programs, high schools, market gardens, and public places in front of a fire station, downtown, all over the place. So I've dedicated my life to spreading this freedom, this sovereignty of being able to grow food, of being able to nourish ourselves, of being able to interact with the ecology around us. I focus on inspiring youth because I believe that if youth grow up in connection to nature, knowing what it's like to grow and taste truly nutritious, beautiful, earth-given food as their birthright, then I just think we'll have a better world. And so if you agree with me, stick around because this workshop is all about some practical, pragmatic steps that we can take to truly making that happen wherever we are, whether it's in our backyards, where we're teaching our children and inspiring our children and inviting the neighborhood kids and growing food all at the same time, whether it's in a public school, a community garden, even if all we have is a small balcony or a kitchen windowsill to grow a few herbs. All of the principles that I'm going to be showing you today totally apply. And my hope for you by the end of this is that not only are you inspired to start an educational garden program, but that you can actually put that into action. And in a few months from now, you'll be sharing photos with me of smiling children planting seeds in the ground or starting a compost pile or whatever it is. So that's my biggest hope, and it's why I'm putting on this program. So this is me, little baby me, about 13, 14 years ago, maybe 15. This is actually in a community garden plot where I was running. We had many stakeholders, many partners. I don't take all of the credit for these programs that I put together. There was a lot of wonderful minds and beautiful people that were behind all of this with me. I was the facilitator. I was the front point. I was the one who really showed up for these kids. I built this deep relationship with a lot of families who really just wanted to engage their children. This particular program was in a social housing development, low-income families who didn't have access to land otherwise, in partnership with the housing co-op, the municipality, and a couple other nonprofit organizations. We were able to install gardens, teach families how to grow food, and we taught them through their children. You can imagine I'm teaching a group of children, and there's a parent standing behind me, and behind the camera, there's a few more. They feel amazing because they're bringing their children to an event where they're going to be nourished, they're going to be taught something, they get to participate, they get to be outside. So it's a no-brainer, right? But the parents learn so much too. right? Because we can explain things so that everybody understands. It's very accessible knowledge and it's very tactile. And so the parents get involved as well. And it becomes this really beautiful family learning experience. Every time I came back, there was something new going on, or somebody would run out and look at the kimchi that I made, or whatever it is. There's so many beautiful meals shared with me and really was wonderful. Again, that's what inspires me to share this information with others now. I want you to imagine, as we're getting started here, a garden that really maximizes learning for students. I'm not talking about maximizing food production. I'm not measuring yield by the number of pound of tomatoes that you pull out of there, or the number of heads of lettuce. A garden that truly maximizes learning as a priority, right? I want you to think to yourself, you can post that in the chat if you'd like. What essential elements do you think it should have? Before we even start, I want you to visualize this thing that we're talking about, this educational garden program, a school garden. What do you think it should have that would distinguish it from any other garden? Post some of those in the chat and take a look after. Our learning objectives for this section, so there's 4 sections. So our learning objectives for this first half hour, we'll say, is to first understand the role and benefits of gardens in educational settings. I'm going to talk about what makes an educational garden program unique or distinct. We're going to explore how gardens can integrate with and enhance various curriculum subjects. A primary school teacher, the garden offers you a tool through which you can teach the curriculum items you were going to teach anyway. Now, this is incredibly powerful because a lot of teachers, a lot of school faculty will look at the garden and think, I'm already overworked and underpaid. I've already got a lot on my plate. I'm already taking homework home to grade it. I'm already staying up until 10 p.m. I'm already showing up at work at 5 a.m. And I don't feel like I get a break. I don't need a garden to care for too. And I empathize with that deeply. But what I'm here to tell you is that the garden is going to make your life easier because children want to be outside. Children want to be engaged with the soil, learning new things in partnership with nature, even if they can't express that verbally yet. There's this deep intuitive pull towards nature. And the beautiful piece is that you can use the garden as a tool to teach all sorts of curriculum subjects. Throughout this program, I'm going to be teaching you some specific links to the curriculum, keeping it relatively broad. I did most of my work in Ontario, Canada. However, I want this to apply to you wherever you are. I'm going to link it to some general curriculum connections and tie the garden to various curriculum connections to get you to start thinking about how you can leverage the curriculum instead of perhaps sit down paperwork or a lecture, right? How you can leverage the garden to teach the same thing and bring children outside to get breathing room, to get grounded. And then as a result, they're calmer, they're more centered for when they come back in class, right? If that is your context, or the kitchen table if you're a homeschooler, or anything in between. So it's obvious to some folks, but I want to talk about where an educational garden makes sense because most people think of school gardens and they think of just traditional schools. And I've often worked with school teachers, but there's a lot of other contexts where it makes sense. Towards the end, I'm actually going to go into how to adapt your educational garden program to other contexts. Most of what I'm going to talk about today pertains to the school setting or some sort of traditional school setting. But if you're an unschooler, I am, right? I unschool 2 of my children. One of my children goes to high school. If you're in an alternative type of school, if you want to work on a community garden program or you participate in a community garden already, if you run an after school program, a daycare, summer programs, camps, even if you're thinking, I'm going to revolutionize this public space in partnership with my municipality, which I've done, this will apply to you. An educational garden makes sense in these settings with the proper planning, of course, which we'll talk about. So let's get into the benefits of garden-based learning. And I'm going to arm you with some scientific-backed conversational points to communicate your program to key stakeholders. Whether you're pitching this to a group of teachers or a parent council, school faculty, right? If you're a coordinator, if you're coming in as a parent and you're saying, I want my child's school to have a school garden program, I'm going to arm you with what you need to be able to talk to somebody about it. Even if you're a group of homeschool parents or community garden club, a youth group organization, or a church, right? I'm going to teach you how to talk about a school, an organic educational garden program, and how to be the champion for that cause. So I'm going to talk about the benefits of an educational garden program. Some of these may seem obvious, right? So the first, it enhances engagement. right? Garden-based learning increases student engagement and motivations. By interacting with the garden, their engagement is enhanced. Of course, they're engaged in tactile learning. They're communicating with each other. They're participating because there's something cool going on. There's something different going on. It's a very dynamic, ever-changing environment. Nature is always in motion, and so are children. When you pair those together, now we're operating on the same wavelength, and those children are far more engaged as a result. Of course, it improves academic performance. Students who are actively engaged in nature often show performance in academic areas. And I say in nature because it's not just garden programs. If you have a natural outdoor classroom, if you're taking regular hikes with your children, if you're engaged in nature in some way, then you already know the calming and cognitive effects of participating in nature. As an adult, you know what it's like to take a wonderful hike. Matt and I've known this fella for over 20 years, and the best conversations that we've ever had is taking a hike in the forest. Now, why is that? It's because of the setting. It's because of that deep connection that everybody's looking for. And the garden is like a portal into nature. Now, this one seems obvious as well, right? But active participation in gardening can enhance physical health, right? Of course, it's going to promote healthy eating habits. I've met very few children who don't eat vegetables that they've sown in the soil, cared for, grown, harvested, prepared, cooked, and put on a plate. I've hardly met a child who won't eat that. And then, of course, being in the garden, being in motion, engaging in nutritious movement is always healthy. And it enhances social skills. So, actually being able to communicate with each other, to plan together, to participate in something together, and leveraging the garden as a community space can enhance your social skills as opposed to sitting in a classroom again. Being in the garden, being in a free-flowing natural environment is bound to enhance your ability to socialize with your peers. And then this one permeates through all of them. Mindfulness and mental well-being. Nature has been proven. Any engagement with nature, fingers in the soil, barefoot on the soil or on the grass, being able to dig through, being able to manipulate plant matter to smell different things, naturally that's going to have a compounded biodiverse kind of effect on your mental well-being. And then it's going to cultivate critical thinking and problem solving, right? So the act of actually building a garden and treating the garden as an enterprise, as a series of problems to be solved, as a system within systems, right? If you're a fan of Donella Meadows' thinking in systems, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful experience to watch children problem solve and hypothesize and test their hypotheses. And creativity and imagination. I view nature as art. I view the garden as an art form. As I'm gardening, as I'm engaging with nature, with a farm, I truly view that as a sort of symphony, as a beautiful canvas. And attention and concentration, again, is just improving cognitive ability. Being able to participate in the garden, to put your fingers in there will improve your attention and concentration. If you've ever done some gardening and come inside, or you take a hike and come back, for the most part, you're feeling more focused. And then you're strengthening our connection to nature, right? Of course, we're strengthening our connection to nature, but it again seems intuitive. But in today's world, we have to be very intentional about our connection to nature. Being intentional about involving our youth in a garden program allows them, like I mentioned earlier, it's a portal into nature, right? So it allows them to actually participate in the natural processes that is our garden. Now, I like to take frequent breaks to stretch and to move. I don't think anybody should be sitting in one space for too long. So I do want to encourage you, even though we're just a little bit in, I've only been talking for about 15 minutes or so. I do want to encourage you to stop, stretch your limbs, and every once in a while, I'll stop you so you can do this. It's a beautiful thing. How am I doing so far, Matt?
On time. We got 10 minutes till I'm taking
Oh,
this opportunity to do some stretching myself. Thanks for
beautiful,
that
Matt.
call out.
I don't know what's going on with this fella's arms, but sometimes mine feel like that too.
After a workout.
We have any questions coming in yet, Matt?
We have a few questions that have come in. I'm saving them
Okay,
for you, but we have
that's
lots coming in, and folks keep them coming.
beauties. Whoa. Sometimes we push things. I don't know how that happened. Bear with me, folks. I'm just looking for. All right. So that was an overview of the benefits. Right now, I want to get into the principles that distinguish educational garden program from anything else. Right now, I come from a background of I've gardened in urban settings. I've built two homesteads. I've milked cows. I've wanted to do the maximize food production thing. I still do this. It's still an incredibly important and a tremendous feeling to have food sovereignty for yourself. But there are other priorities. When we're raising youth, there are priorities that we want to engage with as it pertains to education, right? We want our children to learn, but how? We know there are different forms of learning, right? We can read out of a textbook, we can watch a video, we can listen to a podcast, and we can touch things. We can be tactile, we can be creative, we can engage in conversation, etc. But an educational garden program, as I spoke to before, is truly meant to think of the garden as a tool through which we teach. These principles are meant to set the educational garden somewhat apart, but not necessarily, right? These aren't all unique to an educational garden program, but they're the core programming of what makes an educational garden program what it is. So, the first principle is that the educational garden focuses on learning and knowledge growth. An educational garden places learning first, above yield, soil health, above the varieties or the beauty of your garden. Above all, the educational garden places learning first. It is the number one desired outcome. The garden is an interactive classroom. It prioritizes educational outcomes over plant production. We use every garden element for teaching. Your plants, your tools, your soil, all of these are tools through which you're going to teach, right? You're going to encourage understanding of subjects like plant biology, like math, through real world application in the garden, right? The educational garden values the lessons and the curiosity that's sparked as much as the harvest. You're aiming to create lasting learning experiences beyond the garden, using the garden as a catalyst. It's very important to understand that the strategies that I'm going to give you for designing your garden aren't necessarily there to maximize food production, although that is a wonderful byproduct. The fact that you're not getting a lot of food out of your garden is not indicative of failure in the educational garden, because it is the experiences. In fact, it is the failures themselves that are the desired outcome. We want our children to fail often, to fail fast, right? To fail early. More importantly, we want them to learn from their failures. We want them to engage. We want them to hypothesize, get it wrong, sometimes get it right. We want them to talk to each other, disagree, and learn how to have a discussion around that disagreement. The garden provides a venue for all of that, and those outcomes are the indicators of success of the educational garden more so than the yield itself. Some of the early feedback that I got was, we didn't really get much food out of the garden. I don't know if we're going to do it again next year. But the conversation always resulted in, what did you do? Did you have awesome conversations? Did you have fun? Did you get soil under your fingernails? Did you walk around with your bare feet on the ground? Did you learn a whole bunch of stuff? How do you think that's not also going to be the result of next year, but amplified? Who cares if you grew any food, right? That's not even the point, because that will come as a result, which is why I'm going to advocate for square foot gardening. So we're going to talk more about that later, but the square foot garden is just as it sounds. It is a rectangular or square shaped garden divided into individual square feet. And within those square feet, you grow a set number of plants. I'm going to give you some amazing resources that is going to make this dead easy for you. But the idea here is that, of course, you can see the mathematical applications, but also it gives every student, so if you have a class of 20, it gives every student the opportunity to claim at the very least 1 square foot. Out of all the classrooms that I've worked with, there are a lot of students that get very protective over their 1 square foot. Their plant tag is very well labeled. It has their name in the back. That is their square foot. They are analyzing that plant growth and everything that's going on within that square foot with a very keen eye. What could that do for their ability to read ecosystems? What could that do for their eco-literacy? What could that do for their observation of biodiversity? Of their ability to pick out diseases and pests in plants or signs of stress or soil moisture? Imagine starting your gardening journey with just 1 square foot. how much you could learn from such a small space. I'll let you sit with that one. The next principle is the educational garden is accessible. Yes, I mean that we should follow Americans with Disabilities standards, ADA standards, right? We want this to be accessible for children and adults in wheelchairs with various mobility issues or whatever it is that somebody is experiencing. But what I also mean is we want our garden to be accessible to a crowd. If we're looking to maximize food production, we're actually minimizing pathways. We're designing for efficiency of harvest, but we're maximizing the amount of square footage we can use to grow. Makes perfect sense. In an educational garden program, we want wider pathways. We want more space around the garden beds so that the garden becomes the center stage for time spent in the garden by a crowd, right? If we have 20 kids, 30 kids, I've had up to 60, 65 children in the garden, which is far too many probably, but depends on the size of the garden, right? We want children to be able to gather around the garden so that the person facilitating the workshops has the ability to sit at the garden center stage and have children gathered around. Some are kneeling, some are standing, but we want it to be accessible to all because if a child can't see or participate in the garden, their attention is going to be elsewhere and you've lost them. Instead of maximizing food production, we want to maximize attention. And that's really what I mean. We want everybody to be able to participate in the garden. And that, just for visualization, it might look something like this, right? You're going to have many people, many hands participating in the garden at once. One important factor is the ability to reach, right? If we're working with mostly third or fourth grade classes or younger, we want to ensure that they're going to be able to reach into the garden without stepping on the garden. Okay, so we don't want to compact the soil in our garden. So we don't want to be stepping in the garden because that's just going to make it harder for plants to grow. It makes it harder for the roots to penetrate the soil and get a foothold. By leaving the soil loose and fluffy, we're going to have an easier time growing plants. As a result, we have to truly distinguish between the path and the garden bed. And so we don't want to make the garden beds too wide because then the children aren't going to be able to reach the center of it. Now, the next principle is the educational garden is a reflection of biodiversity. This is universally applicable, but it's doubly important for an educational garden. Sometimes, in order to be efficient, you have to sacrifice some diversity. We can be as biodiverse as possible, but we lose efficiency of harvest or being able to calculate our harvest and things like this, right? But biodiversity also helps us achieve that harvest. So we want to find that middle ground when we're looking to maximize production. But when we're looking to maximize learning, we want to tip the scale even further towards biodiversity because the outcome we're looking for isn't to maximize food production, but to maximize learning opportunities. And we do that by creating more edge, right? If you've ever cooked a brownie, what's the best part of a brownie? It's always the edge, right? So there's a genius that I saw, and wonder if this product still exists, but it was a beautiful brownie pan that created extra edge. It had a wavy shape on it, or you can Google it. And whoever invented that was a genius. Absolutely understood the concept of edge, right? Because what it did is it created a brownie that was just full of edge. And because that's the best part, the edge is where the magic happens. If you've ever observed the edge of a forest and a field, or the border of a lake, or the edge between properties sometimes, or a hedgerow, a ditch, the edge of a road, or the edge of two plants, right? The between two trees. What is it that's going on there? The edge of a rock and a piece of soil, right? You can zoom in or zoom out however you'd like. There's so many examples of edge that exist. So in a garden, the barrier between any two unique elements can be considered an edge. If you're maximizing that edge, you're maximizing the number of plants, the number of species that you have, the vertical height, the three-dimensional size of your garden. When you maximize what's going on around your garden, you are creating edge. Edge invites biodiversity, and biodiversity enhances learning. For example, we have tomatoes and marigolds growing next to each other. That edge between those two plants creates a whole flywheel of incredible benefit. The marigolds attract pollinators. The pollinators interact with the tomatoes next door. If the tomatoes experience any sort of pest, often the marigolds will attract predators for that, parasitic wasps that'll eat aphids or ladybugs. The amount of diversity, the needs and yields between each of those two plants is very diverse and they interact with each other. You're going to hear me mention systems often. And if you need a primer on systems, I'd highly recommend it. The idea here is that you have two complex systems interacting with each other to form one larger system. Right here we have squash, And you'll see what's happening here, right? We have grass underneath the squash leaves, and the squash is casting a shadow on the ground. So you can think about what that's going to do to the soil. That purple flower is called ground thyme. It's a beautiful herbaceous plant. It doesn't grow too tall, so it forms a beautiful ground cover, which will outcompete the grass eventually. And now you have squash over there sitting on the ground, sitting on the thyme rather, and that is keeping the squash from rotting. And you have lettuce to the right of that growing in some more compacted soil, as you can see. And then some other plants, leguminous plants, I can't really tell in the background. So you have a lot of different edges there interacting with each other, maximizing biodiversity. And so you can imagine, right, my youngest is 9 years old. I can imagine him kneeling here and observing every little nook and cranny in just this little space. And I can imagine how much learning, how much inspiration is going to come of that. Just this tiny little space. So the educational garden nurtures inquiry. This leverages biodiversity. But if we're looking to maximize for food production, we're not necessarily looking to maximize inquiry. You want to be certain that you're going to have the food that you're looking to grow, right? And there's definitely a place for that. Of course, there is. But the educational garden is a space set aside specifically for encouraging curiosity and inquiry in students. You want to promote active interaction and exploration within the garden and design activities that challenge and extend the understanding of a student, right? That has the student asking questions, novel questions, coming up with interesting answers. If you are engaging children in the garden and they ask you a question that makes you go, huh, or they say something that has you go, you're doing a good job. Keep it up. And that might look something like this, right? So if you see that look of inquiry, that look of what is going on here? What is this? Oh, come here, come check this out. Those are the sounds that you want to hear in the educational garden. The next principle is that the educational garden builds community. Now, in today's world where segregation is becoming more the norm, we want our spaces to be holistic gathering spaces. We want our spaces to allow for social interaction, to allow children, especially youth, to engage in conversation, engage in disagreement, debate, to engage in inspiration, to collaborate on creativity, to collaborate on problem solving. And community will allow them to do that. Community leads to culture, and having a culture around growing food and interacting with nature, I can't imagine that ever being a bad thing. This includes volunteers. I put this picture in here to remind me to tell you that I am going to answer the question at some point throughout this presentation. I'm a school teacher. What do we actually do during the summer when most of the stuff is growing? I will answer that question. And this is a hint toward what the answer might be, but there's more than one. Volunteers, anybody who actively wants to engage with the garden with you, to participate with you, right? This is not a solo game. It's not one person is running an educational garden program, and when that person is removed, the entire thing falls apart, right? That is a fragile program. What we want to do is build a resilient program, or as Nassim Taleb would call anti-fragile, right? When volatility is applied, the system gets stronger. In order to build a resilient garden program, we want to and need to build a community around that program. And building the community around that program, we build an educational garden program that is resilient. We have a community around the garden program of stakeholders who are really engaged. We have biodiversity within the garden that creates ecological resilience. So the educational garden is meant to carry on from season to season. It's not something that you start in September and end in June or even next September. The idea is for the educational garden to evolve and adapt within the educational system, whatever that may be, whether you're at a school where administrators change every 4 years and students are always changing grades or leaving and coming and going. Despite all of that, you want to make sure that a group of people are championing your garden program so that it continues to evolve and becomes a staple of whatever educational activity you're engaged with your youth. And sometimes that means putting a fence around it to ensure that nobody is running into it or grabbing your vegetables. You want to protect sacred space, right? This is an example of what a school garden might look like. Using marginal spaces next to a parking lot. I see the soil needs to be mulched, but we have a beautifully wild garden here. We have different heights, and it's accessible because we see these wide paths, square boxes that many students can go around. We see many garden beds that students can stand around. It doesn't need to look perfect. It doesn't need to be a work of art, although I always view these spaces as works of art. but it does have to be theirs. They have to feel some sense of ownership over it. They have to feel like they're protecting it. They have to feel like you care about their garden. And the educational garden is also regenerative. Now, for those of you who don't know what that means, regeneration is the opposite of degeneration. We don't want a degenerative garden where the soil is getting sicker and more depleted of nutrients year after year. We don't want something that resembles 100-acre monocropped soy or corn rotation in Ontario, or wheat or canola on the prairies, or potatoes here on beautiful Prince Edward Island. We don't want our garden to look like that because that is a degenerative system. That is an extractive system. It is very imperative that our garden, and in fact, all of our activities are regenerative. In other words, we are enhancing the state of the ecosystem. Now, that is not just an ecological act, it is also a personal act. When we are behaving regeneratively, when we are engaging with ecology in a regenerative fashion, when the health of the land around us is increased, so too is our own personal health. And so this is another very important point towards the garden being resilient, the educational garden being resilient. In order for it to be resilient, perhaps, is because we want to be able to regenerate the space over time so that the health of the ecosystem increases, and thereby the health of the students that pass through the garden is enhanced accordingly. Now, I look like I'm a little sullen there in the background, but I'm very deep in thought. I was teaching a workshop with a good friend of mine, Stefan Sobkowiak, who owns a beautiful orchard in Mirabel, Quebec. I would say that his work is one of the best reflections of biodiversity I've ever seen in my life, in Canada at the very least. You'll see here that there are not only plants, but there's vertical layers of different plants. There's trees, smaller areas, there's vegetables underneath, there's a ground cover, there are bird houses, right? This is a true reflection of biodiversity that starts to mimic a natural ecosystem. Now, what I'm going to be talking to you about today, it pertains mostly to annual vegetables, but understanding that your annual garden is part of an entire ecosystem already, right? If there are already trees in your space, if there's already things growing, there's already an ecosystem happening there. So you are plugging into an ecosystem. I'm not talking too fast for you folks.
Very good pace. I just wanted to emphasize to everyone the value of this webinar. You're getting a 2-hour intensive from a pro, which is normally a 4-module course, like 12 hours of expanded content. Suffice it to say that we're in for a real treat today, and so far it's been meeting my expectations.
Thanks, Matt. I think it can be a lot, but you'll have access to the recording. You'll have access to all of the resources that I'm going to give you. There's a chance that you leave this session with more questions than answers. But I hope that as a result of this session, those questions are answered for you through your experience in initiating this kind of program. At the very least, I hope you're incredibly motivated, and I will do my best to arm you with what you need to be able to accomplish all of this.
On that note, for questions, do you want to take a couple now, or we're behind just a little bit?
Let me get ahead a little bit, and then I'll take a few more
Okay,
questions. I've got 6 more slides, and I think it'll go fairly quickly.
perfect.
Okay. Thanks for your patience, folks. I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit. Let's talk about how the garden links to the curriculum. Now, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly for the sake of time. You're going to have access to the slides. You're going to have access to our full Facilitators Guidebook, which has very detailed curriculum connections. So I'm going to encourage you to review all of that. But I just want to give you a quick rundown of how you might link the curriculum, starting with the most obvious, which is science and biology. In the educational garden, we're going to run plant growth experiments. We're going to do a lot of ecosystem observations. We're going to do a lot of composting science, right? And there's plenty more. You have to teach science and biology as your mandate. If you're a homeschooler, you probably desire to study science and biology. If you're an unschooler, then you want to encourage your children to be very curious about science and biology. The garden becomes this beautiful staging ground for teaching science and biology naturally. Mathematics, right? I talked about the square foot gardening layout, but there's also designing across space and time, right? So there's the geometry of garden design, there's volume and area calculations, there's data analysis, but then there's also the design across the planning across the calendar year, having to figure out if I plant this seed at this time, when is it going to be ready? When is my first or my last frost date? Should I start this seed indoors? How many days to maturity? When do I want to harvest this? Can I count backwards? Can I plant something in the middle of the season? Will I have time? Being able to calculate all of that and then utilize your space across time is going to give your students a lot of practical mathematical applications they can practice. Now we can get into social studies and anthropology, right? So we can talk about cultural plant studies, like the origins and the cultural meanings of different plants, historical garden techniques. We can talk about how ancient gardening methods influenced various civilizations and their way of life, because we've always evolved around food, whether we were nomadic and needing to follow our food, or we were cultivators and we needed to cultivate that food in place. Either way, our entire culture is around food, no matter where you go in the world. Or you can even put together a community garden project and you can talk about how creating a garden can address local needs and teach about current agricultural practices and challenges. Language arts and creativity, right? We can keep a garden journal. We can do some storytelling in the garden. We can do art projects. This is a curriculum element that you need to teach. Why not leverage the garden as a piece of inspiration to do? Physical education and well-being feels pretty intuitive, but in today's sedentary world, it's important to give ourselves excuses and be intentional about engaging in nutritious movement, moving our body, engaging with our body in diverse ways. And the garden gives us the capacity to do that. We can reach, we can stretch, we can crouch, we can crawl, we can lay, we can sit, we can stand, we can bend, right? We can lift, we can carry. There's all sorts of opportunities for physical education and well-being just by participating in the garden, right? So maybe instead of taking the kids to the gym for one day, you take them out to the garden and you do garden yoga, right? Or you do some nutritional education with your harvest, or you literally just treat gardening as an exercise and you're intentional about the movements and ergonomics of the gardening itself. Environmental education feels like a no-brainer, but this gives you the opportunity to not just study the garden itself, but the garden as an ecosystem, and then the garden as an element within a larger ecosystem. And then that larger ecosystem beyond that. We can talk about climate. We can talk about slope. We can talk about watersheds. We can talk about the water cycle, right? There's so many opportunities to talk about weather, climate, geography, and any other piece within environmental education, and just tying it to the garden. How does this affect the garden? How does the garden interact with this? We can build out regenerative projects, build out ecosystem lessons, recycling in the garden, right? All of these elements are things that exist already on your curriculum if you are either a traditional homeschooler with a curriculum or a primary or secondary school teacher. All of these are check marks for you. And that is my last slide for this part. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. And I'm going to give folks the opportunity to answer some questions, and I'll do the answering, I guess, but I'll give other people the opportunity to ask questions.
Hey, let's have some discussion here.
Oh, I noticed the light behind me is a little bit
Oh, you're
halo-y.
good, I think.
Ah.
You have a nice aura. We have lots of questions here, and thanks for submitting those, everyone. They're all over the place, but I guess we can just get them out of the way. You don't have to answer them all, but let's see how many we can get through. First of all, will the recording be provided later? Yes. The recording, the slides, everything. A couple of people asked that. We're going to provide all of that as well as your toolkit. Do you want to touch on the toolkit?
The toolkit is going to be a folder. You're going to have a couple of PDFs, probably a few PDFs. There's going to be my facilitator's guidebook. There's going to be a few subfolders of PDF workshop sheets that you can use as a lesson plan across all 12 months of the year. And you're going to have a whole bunch of other downloadable and printable resources included in that. So it's going to come in one really nice folder package for you.
This person says, so cool. I've heard forest schools, but never garden school. Are they similar?
So maybe I should reiterate. It would be amazing if there was such a thing as a garden school. Perhaps there is, and if there is, please share it with me. But what I meant to say is school garden, right? Forest schools are beautiful settings. They're encouraging children to get in nature, but school garden is a tool that fits in any context. Forest school, Montessori schools, daycares, etc. However, garden school, maybe you'll be the first.
It's a good idea. Can I please get a copy of the slides? Yes. How do I grow a diverse garden in the city? That's a good one.
That's a really good question. And that can be challenging, but it can also be a bonus. What you have to do is leverage the fact that you're in an urban environment. How do you increase biodiversity? Look at your city and think about how much edge exists. I started my work in an urban environment, and I'm thinking back to one school garden program that I worked on, which was literally built on top of asphalt because there was no other space, no green space. They had a playground area. We didn't want to put it in there because it would get trampled on because it wasn't very big. This was an inner city school. But what we did have is an excess of concrete. So what we did is we built 4 foot tall raised beds with tarp underneath. It became a contained ecosystem. And we built them as, get this, as wicking beds. Now, this is a whole thing that I could teach about. So you're going to have to Google it to get an image. but I'm going to describe it. The wicking bed is where you put rocks. So you put a layer of large stones. Before you do that, you take a PVC pipe with an elbow and you run that underneath and you perforate that elbow and then you put rocks all over it. And then you put a layer of something like burlap, some layer that's going to keep soil and the rocks separate, but still allow water to permeate. Then you fill that with your soil. This creates a contained ecosystem. Ideally, you want your garden to be connected to the earth, but if you use containers, this is one cool container that allows you to water. You put your water in the pipe, the water runs directly underneath and fills the reservoir that is the rocks. And through capillary action, now this is a great lesson for your students, which is the act of wicking. If you water, the tissue gets wet the whole way through. That's capillary action. Soil will wick moisture up from the base and will irrigate the plants from underneath, which conserves water. You want to do that because you are on concrete, you have something called the heat island effect. The heat island effect in urban environments is real. It usually raises the temperature in the area by at least a couple of degrees heat. There's thermal mass holding the heat from the sun and then releasing it, right? Now, there's a benefit to that in that usually in an urban environment, you can start your gardening season earlier and it's extended further on the end. So you actually have a longer growing season. What you also have is a lot of vertical space, walls, edges, fences. These spaces allow you to maximize the vertical height of your garden. So you can maximize diversity by cultivating vertical layers, not just horizontal layers in the garden.
Good answer. Very thorough. How can I foster excitement in my kids to do these things with me at home in an age where digital toys and devices are so much more attractive to them?
I'm going to flip that question around. Matt, I'll use you as a guinea pig. You've always worked out, but recently you've really been on top of it, right?
Sure, yeah.
For the most part. So let's say you've started being very consistent with your exercise routine. When you first got started, was it a comfortable experience for you? No, it wasn't, but you did it anyway. You showed up. And how does it feel now when you work out?
I couldn't imagine not working out.
Let's apply that same thought pattern to the garden for a moment. My children won't put down their iPads. I get it. There's this push and pull with technology. However, there's an empowering sensation that comes with consistent interaction with the ecology around. Even if it's just 30 minutes a day, if you're consistent about it, I promise you, you're going to cultivate a love for gardening. It does have to be consistent. And if that's too difficult for now, then the best thing that you can do is model that behavior and be out in the garden. You want more screen time on your iPad? You're gonna have to come outside in the garden because mom's pulling weeds. Hey, while you're here, can you just yank on this? Oh, hey, this is edible. Check this out. Tastes like lemon. Oh, it does taste like lemon. And then all of a sudden, an hour goes by, and this kid's eating a turnip. It happens quickly, is my point.
Yeah, I love that. True. It's so important. And the little snacks that are the reward along the way. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Here's another good one. Is there a way to get around public policy to protect the land? I think you had touched on that at one point in your presentation. Like, how do I stop the township from spraying pesticides near my house?
You become the raging. "Rrr." No, put up a sign, right? If they're going to be spraying pesticides. That seems like a general garden question. If you're running a garden program, you're like, yeah, but the city sprays pesticides along the median or something, then it's just a matter of communication. Nobody wants to ruin a good thing. This person spraying this thing is doing so out of ignorance or out of some sort of obligation. Put a sign up, ask nicely, lead with kindness and compassion and not anger, right? In doing so, you'll cultivate understanding and perhaps community as a result. Now, here's another thing that I'll say is if there's this sort of patch of lawn that keeps getting sprayed with pesticides, that might be an opportunity for you to plant some sort of perennial or native ecosystem there that doesn't require much maintenance and as a result certainly won't be sprayed weeds. There may be some education involved. And this is beyond the scope of this seminar, but we could talk about how I initiated a lot of public area plantings in my hometown in partnership with the municipality.
That's a good point too in the urban areas around the schools, I would imagine. Okay, we're going to hold the rest of the questions for now because we're getting on here in time, but maybe just one more because I know you love this question. I'm good at teaching, but I don't have a green thumb. Even my houseplants always die.
No such thing as a green thumb. I want you to get that into your mind. A lack of a green thumb is just a thumb that lacks practice. Okay. There's a myth out there that people say, I have a green thumb. Look, we're all born with a green thumb. We're all born with a desire to participate in nature. We're all born with the natural instinct and aptitudes to interact with the natural ecosystems around us. The reason that you feel that you don't have a green thumb is because you're out of practice or you've never attempted to practice in the first place. The way that you develop a green thumb is that you grow things. Now, here's what I want to encourage you to do, and this goes against most advice you're going to get. I want to encourage you to be okay with killing your plants. I want to encourage you to fail because through your failures, you will obtain incredibly valuable feedback. I promise you, your thumb will be so green, they won't recognize it against a clover.
Nicely said. All right, that takes us to the next part. It's up to you if you want to keep going to the next part, or we can take a
Mhm.
break. We're a bit
Let's keep
behind, but if you want to keep forging ahead,
let's keep going a little bit. The first two parts are the longest, so let's see how far we can get through the second part before we need to take a break. I'll let you take the lead on making that decision now.
sounds good.
So here we go again. Bear with me here. I'm going to switch my tab. I just want to make sure you can see me switch my tab. Is that the case? Do you see
Do
module two? Okay, so you see part two right now. If I start here, you are seeing part two in full screen?
correct.
Perfect. Thank you. Part two is about seasonal workshop delivery and facilitation techniques. So now I want to get into the meat of how do I engage youth? How do I engage my students in the garden? What do I actually do? What I'm going to encourage you to do is to become a facilitator. If you're a student that wants to get into this, or if you're a teacher that wants to get into this, maybe doesn't see themselves as a facilitator. Now, if you're a teacher, you definitely are a facilitator, and a lot of these techniques will be very familiar to you, will feel like reviewed to you, and that's totally fine. But if you're somebody who says, you know what, I want to champion this, but I'm not sure that I can get in front of a group of kids and teach gardening. I don't even know gardening. I'm not really a gardener. I'm not even a teacher. I just think this is an amazing idea and I want to see it happen. I want to empower you to view yourself as the champion here. Even if you feel like you don't have a green thumb, even if you feel like you're not a teacher, hopefully convince you that you are both of those things. Okay. And you're amazing just as you are in putting your best foot forward, in being vulnerable, in engaging the youth. You can learn alongside them as the facilitator of this program. Okay. So first, we're going to explore the best practices for teaching through workshops. I'm going to teach you 5 key active learning techniques that make garden-based education engaging and effective. These are larger, broad techniques. I'm going to try and give you as many examples as I can, but we're going to have to, for the sake of time, be relatively quick, but I'm happy to answer questions about those. Next, we'll talk about how to design seasonal workshops that align with natural cycles of the garden. I'm going to provide you lesson plans, and there's lots of them, and you can create your own. You're going to have year-round learning opportunities, even in the dead of winter. Finally, we're going to look at some examples of actual garden-based activities that you can implement with your students that are both fun and educational. One of the most important things that I could leave you with this evening is this. The best way to learn is to teach. So before we dive into the strategies, I really want to emphasize this powerful concept. And the best way to learn is to teach. This learning pyramid illustrates how different teaching methods impact retention rates. When you teach something, you engage with the material at a much deeper level, which enhances your own understanding and retention. So even if you feel like you're just starting out, remember that teaching others, especially children, can be the best way to solidify your own knowledge, right? So don't be afraid to dive in and learn alongside your students. The garden's a perfect setting for this because it provides endless opportunities for hands-on learning and discovery, right? Reflect on a time when you had to teach someone something that you were just in the process of learning yourself. Maybe you were explaining concepts from a book that you had just read or talking to your peers about a recent insight that changed the way you approach something in your professional life, right? Think of a time when you learned something and you taught somebody else about it almost right away. Happens often, right? How many times do you, hey, guess what I just learned? That is a teaching moment. You are educating somebody else about something you just learned. You're not a pro, you're not an expert, you're not a guru in any way, shape, or form. You're a vulnerable learner. You're somebody who's not afraid to admit that they're constantly learning and actually wants to maximize their ability to learn by teaching, because the act of teaching is just learning on steroids. The best way to learn anything is to teach it to somebody else. And that's why I do this. So I'm going to talk into some key facilitation strategies that are going to help you deliver effective garden-based workshops. Garden-based workshops result in positive behavior change and learning. These strategies include inquiry-based or experiential learning, place-based education, collaborative learning, and reflective practice. Each of these approaches offers unique benefits and can be adapted to various educational contexts, not just the school or classroom setting. Now, garden-based workshops implementing all of these techniques actually lead to what I would consider maximum learner engagement and retention. When you ensure that the workshops and lessons that you deliver are part of your garden program both educate and inspire your students, you're on the right track. So we're going to explore each one briefly, right? Not in too much detail, but again, I'm happy to answer questions. This is a broad overview of what I believe garden programs should be. Okay, so the first key facilitation strategy is about how you actually engage as the facilitator with your students, your little garden. The first one is experiential learning. This is all about learning by doing, which is perfectly suited to the garden environment. Think about how much more memorable and impactful it is for students to actually plant seeds, water them, watch them grow, prepare them, cook them, eat them, serve them to others, and watch their reaction as they eat them. Imagine how impactful it is for all of that rather than just reading about it in a textbook or watching a YouTube video. It's absolutely imperative that every single student has frequent opportunities to interact directly with the garden itself. They must be allowed to touch it, to see it, to smell it, to taste it. Never tell a child to not put soil in their mouth. We want them to use their senses. We want them to experience the garden fully. Direct engagement, active discovery. Those of you who are teachers who have studied educational science understand many of these. Sensory engagement, emotional connection, and there's much more. So we can go through these in more detail, but I'll leave it for now. If you have any questions, I can always come back to this slide. The next, I want to talk about inquiry-based learning, which is another powerful strategy for garden-based education. Inquiry-based learning empowers students to become active seekers of knowledge. So instead of just presenting information, which I call the push of learning, we actually encourage students to ask questions and explore answers, which I call the pull of learning. Rather than pushing education onto students, we're allowing the students to pull the information that they're most curious about, because that's the stuff they're going to retain and they're going to learn anyway. So we really want them to become active seekers of knowledge. This approach turns the garden into a living lab where curiosity drives learning rather than just structure. We could ask thought-provoking questions. Once their curiosity is piqued, we can guide them through an investigative approach using experiments, research, different observations to find answers. We can develop problem-solving skills, a natural outcome of inquiry-based learning. Reflecting on that inquiry process is crucial. After conducting your investigations, you should consider what worked, what didn't, why, right? This reflection is going to help them understand their learning journey and reinforce the knowledge they gain. Now, cooperative learning is all about students working together to achieve common goals, right? Those of you who are teachers know the power of this already. The garden is a perfect setting for this, right? It naturally lends itself to teamwork, to collaboration, which makes learning a shared and enjoyable experience. It's the default of the garden, right? Rarely is gardening a solo act. In cooperative learning, students often take on specific roles within their group. So it gives them a sense of learning how to organize, how to play to each other's strengths, right? So imagine a team where one student is responsible for recording observations, another is responsible for planting, another for watering. This sort of division of labor ensures that everyone has a role to play and contributes to the group's success. For instance, in a salad garden workshop that you'd be delivering, one student could research the best conditions for growing lettuce, while another prepares the soil and another plants the seeds. And then the planning itself, like in the middle of winter, most of the garden workshops that I've started have been started in February. Here, we engage in collaborative planning, encouraging students to work together to design the garden plots. This includes discussing what plants to include, how to space them, where to place each one. This process really helps them learn to negotiate, to compromise, to make decisions as a team, right? It makes the project more engaging because they actually have ownership over the garden design. Now, place-based education is about connecting learning to the local environment around them, to the community, right? It makes it more relevant and engaging. So when a student can tie the lesson to what they see and hear and experience around them, whether it's culturally across time or just environmentally in their space, what they observe, what they see going on, it makes it more relevant and engaging for them. And then they retain the information better, whatever it is you're trying to teach them through the garden. The garden gives you the portal to that. It gives you a tie into place because it is rooted in the place, in the culture, the climate, the ecosystem, the context in which it's planted, right? So the garden becomes this ideal place to implement it because it's actually rooted in the local environment. It can easily incorporate cultural and historical elements. The local environment becomes your classroom. There's a lot of cultural relevance. Community involvement is a huge piece of it, which we'll talk to as we move on. And then finally, we have reflective practice. Reflective practice is all about encouraging students to think critically about their learning experiences, right? In the garden, this becomes this powerful tool to help students internalize and make sense of what they've learned, but it also allows them to speak to their future selves. I remember one of the first things I found of my grandfather's after he passed away was his garden journal. Oftentimes, it wasn't even about gardening at all. It was just a daily journal that he kept about the weather or something that was occurring with a neighbor. But this became an invaluable resource later on for me to reference to think about how I took over my grandfather's home at that time, to think about how the ecosystem in that space is going to behave, how the shade works, how the weather affects the space. Next to this fence gets more sun and things dry more. It becomes an invaluable resource later on. So don't discount the importance of daily notes and a garden journal, even if it feels like those observations are mundane or not applicable at the time. Self-reflection, journaling for growth, discussion as insight, right? Feedback loops. This is really important, right? So obviously, there's group reflection, which is valuable. You can facilitate group discussions where students can share their reflections, which allows them to learn from each other's experiences. These can be particularly enriching because they provide different perspectives and insights. For example, after a group project, students can discuss what worked well, what didn't, why, right? And then it helps them see the project from multiple angles. But what's really important here is that we're able to observe the feedback that we get from our failures and our successes, to see what's happening, to internalize that feedback, and then leverage that feedback in order to interact again. So there's a principle in something called permaculture design, which is something that I teach. Maybe you're familiar with it, maybe you're not. But there's a principle called observe and interact. And the idea here is that we're observing our ecosystem, we're collecting feedback, we're accepting the feedback, and then we're interacting with the ecosystem as a result, being informed by that feedback. When students learn to do that, is a nudge toward what I call eco-literacy, which is the ability to read and interpret the ecosystem around them. So those are the 5 key facilitation techniques or principles. There's one more, arguably the most important, which is to make it fun. Don't be boring. When students feel like it's another chore, when you feel like it's another chore, you're going to be less apt to participate. So it needs to be fun for you, the facilitator, the teachers involved. It needs to be fun for the school. It needs to be fun, especially for the students involved. Gardening doesn't have to be a chore. Sometimes it is, but it's hard work that gives a sense of collaborative accomplishment, right? So let the garden be a fun space. Let it be a little wild, right? Let us run around barefoot and jump and roll and accidentally step on something and oops, it's fun. All right. So I've just got a couple more slides here and then I'm going to go through these really quickly, which is just going to give you a preview of the workshops. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because you're getting every single one of these workshops as part of your package. If you're here live, you're going to get it via email. If you're watching this as a recording, there'll be a download link for you. Okay, so seasonal workshop delivery. I start with fall workshops because that's what we're heading into the school year. There's a series of fall workshops that we can work on: harvesting techniques, herbal remedies, seed saving, biodiversity. These are things we can start to do throughout the fall. Composting is a great way to start a garden, especially if your plan is to start a garden, but oh, we're not actually going to get started until the spring. That's great. Start composting right now. You're going to have all the soil you need by then. Cover cropping, green manure, you can do if you're putting a garden to bed. I can answer questions about that. Preparing the garden for winter, putting it to bed, mulching it. All of these activities become potential learning experiences, and you can find out where your curriculum links to any one of these specific activities in the packet that I'm going to give you. Each workshop has a series of curriculum connections attached to it that you can review. Hopefully that inspires you and informs your ability to link your curriculum, whatever it is you're working with, to the workshop itself. In the winter, still a great time to focus on planning and indoor activities. It's actually the best time to launch your school garden program, right? So there's some examples here that you'll see of activities. Spring is a time of renewal and growth in the garden. It makes it perfect for activities that prepare the garden for the upcoming growing season, early spring. For school settings, it's imperative that you get some quick growing crops in. So you're going to see things like salad growing workshop here. And this is beautiful because you can grow a lot of leafy greens, spinach, lettuce, Swiss chard, radishes. These are all very fast growing things that you will definitely be able to harvest before June. If you're in a conventional school setting, you want your students to have some sort of harvest before school is out. Starting seeds indoors is possible in the spring if it's before the frost date, right? So if you're March, April, you're probably going to start a lot of your seeds indoors for summer growing. And we'll talk about the summer later. But then you're also going to direct seed your salad garden outside. Summer is still a great time to learn in the garden. Even if kids are out of school, there's still a lot of opportunity to bring others in to the garden throughout the summers. Again, we can talk about that, and I can talk about various contexts and applications for summer maintenance. Summer is a time of rapid growth and productivity in the garden. It's also a time of student absence. We'll talk about summer maintenance in the upcoming module, but you can note right now the hint, I guess, would be that daycare programs, summer camps, several other community and youth groups can actually take advantage of the school garden throughout the summer while the core students are away. So listed here are some examples of summer workshops that you can conduct. I'll let you look at the overview without reading through them. And again, you're being provided every single one of these workshops as an individual document. In addition to the facilitator guides, I've got a lot of bonus resources for you. Growing Up Organic is a program that I worked with for several years in Ontario. So there's a lot of great resources there on their website. Seed Change, I worked with them when they were formerly USC Canada. They're called Seed Change now. You can go check them out at weseedchange.org. And then the Nature Conservancy has a lot of resources as well that you can check out. Now, as part of your package, you're getting these garden planning cards. These come in sheets of 4. They're meant to be printable. Now, what I would do with these cards, this is going to teach you how to garden per square foot. So it's going to help you learn and help your students plan the garden, but also learn how many, like what are the plant spacings, right? How many spinach seeds can I put in 1 square foot? In this case, 9, right? So you're going to divide 1 square foot into 9 smaller squares and place 1 seed in the middle of each square. It tells you what are its favorite companions. In the case of spinach, you're going to put them near peas or beans because they're leguminous and they're tall and they form a bit of shade. And spinach actually likes a little bit of shade. Spinach does okay in the sun, but I think it actually does great in partial shade. You want to plant your seeds outside before the last frost, and they'll be ready for picking in 6 weeks. So the amount of produce that you can grow, right? Imagine 9 spinach seeds per square. That's 9 plants in 1 square foot. I had a question earlier about urban growing, especially if you're working in a small space. Things like spinach, you can grow a lot of food in a small space if you're strategic about how you place it. And these garden planning cards are going to help you plan your garden. They're a lot of fun to work with. I would print the pages, cut them into 4 squares, and have them laminated so that they're waterproof and can be brought into the garden. I'm giving these to you guys, and I would love to see you do that. You're also getting a gardening guide called Good Bug, Bad Bug. This document helps you identify pests and predators in the garden and understand what insects you're seeing. And it helps your students identify insects, whether they're pests that are eating your plants or they're predators which eat the pests, right? And that brings us to a close for this part. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you for maybe some more Q&A and we can take a break. I think we're about halfway through.
Yeah, I love those resources. Those cards are awesome. I would totally put those in my gardening toolbox and just always have them there. I have a whole stack of them.
Totally. They're so much fun.
So one of the questions from the previous part that we didn't get to earlier was, can you please go over the part about crop rotation again?
Yeah, I'll go over that briefly, but it might require some independent research on your part. So what do I mean by crop rotation? Crop rotation is the act of not planting the same thing in one place twice. Now, there's a lot of plants that don't require a lot of nutrient intake, then you can get away with planting them 2, 3 years in a row in the same place. There are exceptions to the rule, but as a general rule of thumb, general rule of green thumb, perhaps, You don't want to plant the same thing in one place twice. Now, why is this? It is because each plant requires different minerals and nutrients from the soil. So as the plant draws those minerals and nutrients, the soil starts to become slightly deficient in whatever those minerals and nutrients are. So if you move one plant, let's say tomatoes, because they require a lot of nitrogen, for example, and then you put some sort of leguminous plant or something from the cabbage family or something from the carrot family in that place, it's going to ask something different of that soil. And so what you're doing is you're maximizing what that soil has to offer. Now, that doesn't give you an excuse not to nourish your soil, not to add compost, to add minerals and nutrients along the way, but it does also reduce pest and disease pressure because a lot of pests and diseases will actually camp out in the place where their food exists. If you take that food away and put it somewhere else next year, you're going to confuse them and reduce pest pressure. Best practice of acting as nature does, which is being in motion. Nothing is static in the garden.
Makes sense. And related to that, the next question, yes, about this, it's not really a question, more of a request.
Yes, about the
So
soil amendments.
I think you had touched on something to do with soil amendments and the person's taking you up on it. Specify in the chat if you would, please, if that's your question, what if you could expand on that a bit, please.
Sure. I would say that as a general rule of thumb is all I can give because the answer for most garden questions is it depends. The way that I diagnose issues or things that I observe in the garden is to trace it down to the root and look at the ecosystem as a whole. So rather than isolating one thing, I look at the whole ecosystem and I think, what is going on? Sometimes it's that your soil is depleted. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. I do not perform soil tests. I almost never perform a pH test because the acidity in your soil is ever changing anyway. So unless you suspect that something is extreme, like you're planting underneath a bunch of pine trees or something, I don't think it's necessary. I rarely actually look at these specific minerals. What I do instead is I look at how my ecosystem is behaving. I look at what's already growing in place, and I use that as a judgment for what the soil conditions might be, in addition to a few other things, like a soil jar test, which is taking clumps of soil, putting it in a jar, filling it with water, shaking it, and letting it rest for a day, seeing the different layers form, where you're going to have layers of clay, silt, sand. So you're going to see how your soil is composed. That's an important observation. And then you'll see what plants are already growing because those plants will tell you what minerals and nutrients they're taking advantage of. Now, almost always, compost and mulch are the answer, right? And sometimes compost is mulch in the case of a densely planted bed. Just adding high organic matter is often all that is required for a healthy garden. Now, you can do other things. You can add calcium in the form of bone meal or blood meal. You can buy mushroom compost, which is a little different. If you're growing a lot of fruiting plants like tomatoes, there's a product that I like to use called fish emulsion, which is a high nitrogen fertilizer made of fish pee. So there's a lot of opportunities there for leveraging waste as a resource. But the answer to how should I amend my soil is always it depends and requires some observation. And you won't get it right away, and that's totally fine. But what I want you to avoid doing is thinking, I can't do this because my plants keep dying, or I just can't grow in my yard because my soil won't allow it. Not true. You can always change it. Nature is always in motion.
I think we've got time for one more question here. And folks, if for whatever reason we don't get to your question today, we'll definitely follow up with you after the webinar and get that answered for you. This one's interesting, Al. Are there any local authorities that you can recommend for animal habitat education? Would like to attract more birds and work with local conservation authorities to protect some of our rare species.
Depends where you are. Where I am and where Matt is, there are conservation authorities embedded with local government. You can connect with them to see what you can do. Oftentimes, they have native flora and fauna rehabilitation programs, bat houses, turtle habitat, or free seeds for pollinator enhancement. So there's a lot that you can do. You could become the go-to person for this essentially by just doing some research, educating yourself a little bit more than those around you, and actually observing the ecosystem to see what works and just doubling down and doing more of that. That is most of my experience. If you're really inspired to enhance local wildlife and biodiversity, then sometimes doing something as simple as putting a rotting log on the ground, letting things dig holes, letting a few things just grow wild and untouched, having what I call a zone 5 in your garden, which is untouched wild space that you just leave alone, bird houses, bat houses, plant milkweed for monarch butterflies. There's a lot of strategies that you can take, and it just depends what is the deficiency in your local area, what are the quote unquote native plants in your area, what's already growing, what wants to be encouraged in your space, and just do a little bit of research. We're blessed with the magic of the internet now, so most questions can be answered if we know what to ask.
Yeah, and we might as well get to this next question because it's directly related. How else can I attract pollinators? I think you've answered that, but this person's in the suburbs of a big city and they say they're seeing less and less of them over time.
Well, the suburbs give you the greatest opportunity to increase biodiversity because you have beautiful edge. So the suburbs are wonderful because you have just enough space to really be able to do something with and enough edge between whatever property lines, trees, in order to increase. It's just this opportunity that is often wasted. I think maybe that's what you're observing. You could be biodiversity in the suburbs, but more importantly, if you do it right, you'll inspire your neighbors to do the same. So how can you do it? Really just start planting things. Maybe start by replacing your lawn and planting not necessarily just a high production food garden, although I recommend it, but scale that to your desire. Planting a lot of native plants, planting a meadow instead and observing that as part of your garden program, or planting a bunch of trees and different layers can increase habitat. As long as you're okay with a little bit of untidiness, a little bit of wildness in your garden, you'll be just fine.
Hmm. You could be a beacon of light in your community. I love that. That's
Yes.
awesome. All right, so we'll get to our break now and I really encourage everybody to do some earthing, like for real. I'm gonna get out there too and get barefoot on the ground and take a moment to discharge and recharge. Someone else was asking, will the slides be provided later? Yes. For anybody that just joined, all the slides, the recording link, and Al's amazing toolkit will be coming within 24 hours or so. All right, so let me just put our break slide up here and we can take a quick stretch.
How long?
We're going to take 5 minutes. So let's be back here in 5 minutes. Try to stretch, get some water, go outside, get some fresh air. If anybody's lucky enough to still have sunlight, get some sun on your skin. We'll meet back in about 5 minutes. All right, we're back. Just give everybody a second to come on back. Hopefully you had a good break. I went outside for a few minutes, got my feet on the ground, and now I feel slightly more alert. It is almost 8 o'clock at night.
It's almost 9. What are you talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah, 9 for you, so it's gonna be bedtime there, but not yet. Not before we finish this amazing webinar.
Amazing. I like when you use words like
Thrilling.
that.
That's what it's all about, right?
Rock on.
Yeah,
You ready to rock?
ready to get back to it.
Looks like you're past your expiry date.
Good.
Okie doke. Part 3. Let's find out. So hopefully the pacing is okay for everybody so far. I'm hoping we're still done on time. So I'm going to try and keep a good pace and there'll be another opportunity for questions. And then I'd like to leave some time open at the end here. But my goal is to be done on time. Part 3 of the course, right? In this one, we're going to talk about the importance of building a strong community around your garden program. We're going to look at identifying key stakeholders and creating mutually beneficial relationships with those stakeholders. And we're going to talk about coordinating volunteers. So remember the principles that we discussed in part 1, right? An educational garden is resilient. Resilience requires redundancy. And just like in nature, diversity of support is key to long-term success. With robust and diverse support from the community, your program is far more likely to become a long-term asset. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this part here. Okay. So we're going to talk about what is a stakeholder. We're going to learn to identify and engage the key stakeholders that can help launch and support your program. Then we're going to talk about some steps towards mutually beneficial relationships, mostly in the form of the 8 forms of capital. If you're not familiar with that, don't worry, we'll jump into it and I'll give you a good overview and maybe some fuel for further research. Finally, we'll talk about coordinating those volunteers, which really, for the most part, volunteers are the lifeblood of many educational garden programs. And I think if we can just implement some effective kind of reciprocal volunteer management strategies, then we can have a really resilient, sustainable, regenerative garden. So we're going to talk about how to recruit, organize, and even motivate your volunteers to ensure that they actually feel valued and engaged. And then we'll talk about some best practices for coordinating their activities and really ultimately just creating a positive, inclusive environment for everyone involved. So, what is a stakeholder? Let's start with that question. A stakeholder is anyone who has an interest in the success of your garden program, right? Identifying and engaging your key stakeholders is crucial for launching and supporting your program, right? Key stakeholders in educational programs can include students, parents, teachers, educators, administrators, local community members, local businesses, local government, nonprofit organizations, local farms, gardening experts, local chefs, volunteer coordinators, volunteers themselves, right? People in the neighborhood, right? Each one of these stakeholders brings unique resources and perspectives that can help your program thrive and be resilient. Students are the primary learners, right? They're actively engaging and providing feedback on the garden activities. I want you to think of your students as stakeholders within your garden, though. It's very important that their feedback is incorporated because it is imperative that the students feel a sense of ownership over the garden, that it isn't something that they're participating in, but something that they own, that they're responsible for. That's going to enhance the learning that they achieve as a result of using the educational garden program as a tool to teach your curriculum, right? So they bring the energy, they bring the curiosity, and their involvement is absolutely imperative for the program's success. Now, parents can offer volunteer support, they can assist in fundraising, they can promote community awareness, they can lead activities like a family garden day, they can help with fundraising events like plant sales to raise money for your program, or they can just spread the word through community groups online or in person. Now, teachers and educators, right? And I say teachers and educators because if you're involved with youth, you are an educator, right? You're going to integrate those garden activities into your curriculum and facilitate learning. You're going to use the garden for practical lessons in subjects like biology by studying plant life cycles or math by measuring plant growth rates. Administrators allocate resources and embed the garden in the school's educational goals. That's their job. They can facilitate resources. They can integrate the garden with school objectives. They can approve programs like a garden internship program for older students to gain credits, which is a real example of a high school program that I participated in. Now, local businesses can supply resources for funding, which benefits community engagement. You can partner with local nurseries for plant donations in exchange for advertising. These are all concrete examples from my experience. You can partner with hardware stores for wood in exchange for some sort of exposure. I've received funding for an educational garden program from a recycling plant, which recycled metals and had a budget every year for some sort of charitable donation. Some workers there had kids that went to the school and helped steer those funds into our program. These are examples of how you can partner with local businesses to achieve goals for material and financial resources. Community members as well, right? Neighbors, people who live around the school or garden might be encouraged to become advocates and partners within the garden as well. Now, local government can give you grants, some permissions if you need it, some support to align with the community development or the development of your garden program as a whole. They can help you apply for community grants. You can request the use of public spaces to expand garden projects. These are effective ways to gain their support. If there are any questions, I can talk about how to pitch these types of programs to a community council, which I've had to do before. I think there's a lot of win-wins here with municipal government. And nonprofit organizations, most of the work that I've done in my career has been through nonprofit, aside from my entrepreneurial work. In the nonprofit world, we have infrastructure for sharing resources, sharing expertise, collaborating on grants for sustainability. Oftentimes, they'll have coordinators or grant writers in place, or at the very least, the legal structure to receive grants, larger grants, seed grants, growth grants, 3-year grants for your programs. These are the things that are going to fund your garden to get started. So, working with any sort of environmental, food, agriculture nonprofit. You can work with them to offer workshops in the garden, right? You can even work with them to hire positions. Some of the earlier positions that I've had in this space that got my foot in the door here were actually paid coordinator positions that were fueled by a grant that nonprofit had received. Take some water. Okay, so 3 more here. Local farmers, these are my favorite folks, gardening experts, They can offer garden and farm-based knowledge, right? Skills, resources. You can host a farmers talk where local farmers come into the classroom and share insights on crop rotation or soil health or answer questions, talk about their farm as an ecosystem. You can bridge that urban-rural divide if that's your situation. You can think about how the garden applies at a larger scale, at a farm scale. We've done a lot of farm field trips where we've pulled the students out of the class. We had some funding for a bus, and we bring the kids out to farms to engage with that piece of property. Many of them were inspired to become farmers as a result of our projects, which is a very humbling experience to see local chefs, some of my favorite people because I love food. That was my entry point into gardening, delicious food, right? So local chefs can engage with the garden to incorporate fresh produce into their menus. If you have a kitchen or cafeteria at your school, how can you integrate the garden into that piece instead of serving burgers and hot dogs? Could you integrate garden produce into the cafeteria? If that's your situation, you can collaborate on having a harvest dinner where chefs can create dishes using the garden's produce to demonstrate this farm to table concept. You can invite a chef to do a cooking demonstration or even a lesson. How can you integrate local chefs and restaurants into your program? And then volunteer coordinators, right? So these are often sometimes paid positions. Often it's a parent volunteer. I'd say most of the time it's been a volunteer on the parent council in my context. These are people who will manage volunteer recruitment, scheduling, and retention because we think of our educational garden program as an enterprise. And so we want to be able to retain the active stakeholders, the people who provide value to our enterprise. We want to keep them within that community. So we want them to feel valued, right? So that's what I mean by retention. We could develop a mentorship program where experienced volunteers guide newcomers. Basically, it gives you this consistent and knowledgeable volunteer base. Everybody learns together, right? That's the concept we're trying to create here. So I'm going to give you a moment to scan this image. This speaks to the 8 forms of capital. Very important to understand or have at least a more holistic view of the resources that you already have. And it's like that old Scotiabank saying, you're richer than you think. You have more than you think you have if you take the time to inventory the resources you have access to. I provided this in the context of a homestead design, a rural homestead design course, a permaculture design course. And in that, we're thinking about what resources we have to develop our piece of property. So I just want you to apply that to the idea of the educational garden program for a moment. There's obviously some form of financial capital needed, right? Money. This is the most straightforward form of capital. It includes money, income, savings, investments, loans, whatever it is. But while financial contributions are crucial for purchasing materials and funding activities, they're just one small part of the overall picture. In fact, there are other forms of capital that are often far more helpful in allowing you to facilitate your educational garden program. These are your physical objects and infrastructure, equipment, tools, buildings, technology. For our garden program, this could include donated gardening tools, greenhouse supplies, even the construction of garden beds. So thinking about these key stakeholders, what resources you have, these are your yields, the things you have to use toward your educational garden program. Thinking about your needs, the needs of your garden program that aren't currently being met by one of these forms of capital. And then the needs and yields of stakeholders outside of your system, of your educational garden program, and what sort of reciprocal relationship can you create where needs and yields are being shared so that there's some sort of balance, so that the resources that you need are acquired by moving your excess and providing value to somebody else, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Living capital, this refers to the biological and ecological resources in our garden, animals, plants, soil, water, right? Healthy soil and diverse plant life are absolutely fundamental to a thriving garden. So stakeholders can really contribute to living capital by donating plants, seeds, compost, or expertise in sustainable gardening practices that they practice. Social capital, these are the relationships, the networks, the connections that we build with our community, right? This includes our relationships with our volunteers, our local businesses, our community organizations, friends, neighbors, family, right? Social capital is really critical for fostering collaboration and support. For example, you might have a local gardening club nearby. They might offer some volunteer hours. This is a way of them contributing social capital, or community center could give you space for workshops in the summer. Then there's spiritual capital. This includes the more intangible aspects of our beliefs and values, our faith, our intention, our positive mental states, our actual connection to the natural world, right? In the context of our garden program, this might involve fostering a sense of purpose and community among participants, promoting mindfulness through garden activities, or engaging in rituals that celebrate the garden's growth and harvest. Depending on your context, partnering with a church or a faith group. This is an exchange of spiritual capital. Now, experiential capital are the skills, the knowledge, the physical experience that you gained or that the key stakeholders have gained from hands-on activities. So for our garden program, this is the practical skills that students and volunteers develop. It's also planting techniques, soil management, composting. So experiential capital can be provided through workshops, demonstrations, hand-on learning opportunities. If you have somebody that has a lot of gardening experience that they can share, then that is a valuable resource that you can provide to others. So one way of recruiting volunteers is saying, come and join us. We have a master gardening on, and you're going to learn a lot by volunteering with us. This is an exchange of experiential capital. Intellectual capital is the knowledge and ideas that support our garden program. This could be educational materials, curriculum integration, innovative gardening techniques. I'm providing you with a lot of intellectual capital in the form of the kit you're going to get following this session. That kit contains a lot of intellectual capital that I've accumulated throughout the years that I'm providing freely to you to leverage and to build your own experiences with. And then there's cultural capital. This is the one that can't be built alone. This is the traditions, the arts, the stories, the rituals that enrich our community. In our garden program, this could be celebrating cultural practices related to gardening. It could be leveraging cultural groups in our area to help teach us about cultural practices in the garden, indigenous planting methods, seasonal harvest, festivals, storytelling events that connect gardening with local heritage, right? So this is a form of cultural capital. What sort of culture exists in your place, and how can you leverage that in a mutually beneficial way? Recognizing and leveraging these 8 forms of capital will lead us to creating more holistic and regenerative gardens. It'll allow us to build our educational garden community in a more holistic manner without only relying on something like money. Each form of capital offers unique value, and by engaging stakeholders in diverse ways, we can foster stronger, more resilient relationships that benefit everyone involved. So we're creating these complex ecosystems of value exchange, and the garden becomes the milieu for all of that. All right, so let's get into the big question. The question that I get asked first, almost always, is, but Al, what about summer break? Look, there are a myriad of possibilities here, and I've spoken to some of them already. You can involve other programs and organizations, youth groups, summer camps, daycares can all be involved throughout the summer in order to continue the program. Usually volunteers will step up and a volunteer coordinator will step up and they'll say, we've got this. I've partnered with mental health organizations. I've partnered with daycares. I've partnered with just summer camps, summer camp programs, just community volunteers, neighbors. I have volunteered for them often enough. The benefit there is, of course, we get to garden, right? We get to actually leverage the garden as a community garden. Sometimes you just need to rely on good old-fashioned community support. If you approach the value exchange from a holistic perspective, take inventory of your 8 forms of capital as a group. What do you have access to, and what do you have to offer volunteers? What can you offer these people who are willing to come in and participate in the garden throughout the summer when the kids are not there? What can I offer them so that they want to and benefit greatly from participating in my program throughout the summer? I'm going to talk now about how to manage volunteers. I'm going to give you a lot of resources for this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this presentation because I'm cognizant of the time. I'll encourage you to review the resources and ask any questions that you might have about volunteer management, okay? So first, we want to identify the needs for volunteer support, especially during the summer months when school's out. The garden still requires care because we want the students to come in September to a thriving garden, not a big mess of weeds or what have you, right? Which, by the way, there's nothing inherently wrong with weeds. They're just good plants in the wrong place. So we want to start with garden maintenance tasks, right? So regular watering, weeding, and pest control through biodiversity. Sometimes plants die. This is a part of nature, right? And then we want to work on harvesting and planting, timely harvesting of ripe produce, right? We want the garden to be picked. We don't want to leave those tomatoes on the vine. We want to actually pick them. If students aren't around to do them, we want whoever is managing it throughout the summer to enjoy the benefit of their labor and actually be able to pick those summer crops. And so students who want to reward the volunteers that participate in the garden program throughout the summer will plant things like tomatoes, cucumbers, and zucchini to provide a yield to the people who graciously give their time. This is a value exchange, and not a single dollar was spent in order to achieve it. Preparation for fall is another thing, right? So you might have some volunteers who might start indoor seed starting for fall planting. If you have tomatoes growing in your garden and you would like to put spinach in there to grow that until October, November even, then you could even start some spinach in a cup or a little egg carton. Once those tomatoes are spent, you pull them out, you replace them with spinach. This is called successional planting. So then we talk about how to recruit volunteers. I usually start with an outreach campaign. You can use social media, community bulletin boards. You can send out an email. I have an email template for you if you are a teacher working in a school. I have an email template that you can send out to parents of your class. Use platforms like Instagram for quick garden updates. You can post flyers on local community boards. You can engage with online community groups. Essentially, you want to consider reaching out to individuals who have previously contributed to the program. You want to invite them to participate. You could send out a We Miss You newsletter with a sign up link. It depends how elaborate you want to get with it. You can collaborate with local community centers, youth organizations, as I mentioned. Boys and Girls Club is one that I've worked with a lot, gardening clubs to recruit volunteers. And oftentimes, even nursing homes, if there's a nursing home nearby, it's a great opportunity for the elderly, for our seniors, our elders. You can set up informational booths at community centers, at gardening events, seed swaps, Seedy Saturday, if there's one of those happening in your town. There's usually some sort of group that would be happy to get involved in an initiative like this. You just need to find them. So this is the invitation to volunteer email template that I talked about. You'll have access to this as part of your kit. You also have access to these images and a few other resources to help you identify common pests and weeds. It's important if you're going to recruit volunteers to have some sort of orientation day, especially if they're new gardeners. If they're experienced, then they'll probably teach the orientation day. If you have volunteers who say, yes, I'm willing, you can provide them with your garden planning cards. I have ecosystem cards that you'll have access to, and there's a few other resources here that you can provide them as well. This is a simple example of a volunteer calendar that you could build. You could protect it from the rain and post it somewhere near the garden or in a garden shed just to be able to communicate. Again, you're building community, you're creating a hub, right? So this is a way of you to being able to coordinate that. I just wanted to share with you a plant giveaway that we created to fund a community garden program, or rather an educational garden program. We hosted this as a community event. A group of experienced gardeners gave away free potted plants that they grew and shared their own expertise while we promoted our school garden program. As a result of events like this, many new school garden programs were initiated and several new volunteers became engaged. This was a community building event where people gave their time, their experience, their social capital. We leveraged our social capital, living capital in the form of plants that you see on the ground. These are resources that didn't necessarily cost any money because these were material and experiential resources and social resources that these people had and were more than willing to contribute. And as a result, there was some beautiful reciprocity, some beautiful programs that were born. Very grateful. Now, here's a very important part. If you're engaging in volunteer coordination, no pay does not mean no compensation. Recognizing volunteers' contributions really does help retain them and shows appreciation for their hard work. So host appreciation events, right? Provide certificates, acknowledgements, give them a green thumb award, or hand out some garden tools, or offer some public recognition if nothing else. Feature outstanding volunteers in newsletters, on social media, or during public events so you can highlight their efforts. The goal here is to have them feeling incredibly appreciated because, of course, they are. Now, here is just a few resources for those of you who are interested in diving deeper into how to engage volunteers for any endeavor. There are a lot of passionate people in every community, and someone who believes in your program enough to offer their time is the biggest stakeholder of all. So just be sure that this too is a mutually beneficial relationship. All right, that brings us to the end of part 3, Matt. I recognize we have about 25.
Yeah, we'll have to speed things up just a little bit, but let's get to the questions. I think that's how we can make up our time is if we knock out some of these questions, and they're still, as we're talking, coming in, but
Right
keep
on.
them coming, folks. We'll do our best. From the last part, these might be from part 1 or 2 still, Al, just so you know. Are indoor worms difficult to maintain? And do they attract bugs like fruit flies?
If they attract fruit flies, you're putting too much in there, so only feed them the capacity they have to eat. Don't give them meat, don't give them citrus, don't give them onions and garlic. If you can avoid those things, and give them a little bit at a time to see how fast they eat it, then give them a little more. Your bin will not become stinky. You want to keep it moist. Usually use a tote bin. I've got a few around me, but I can't quite lift them because they're full of junk. A tote bin that I will fill with substrate, right? You're filling it with cardboard at the bottom, egg cartons ripped up into there, that kind of thing. You put your worms in there. Red wriggler worms are the worms that you're looking for. And these worms, on average, get this double in population every day. Yeah. So that's a lot of worms. Eventually, you are left with excess worms that you can gift to somebody, perhaps in exchange for volunteer work. It's wonderful, actually. And what you get out of it is a beautiful thing. What you want to do is also allow for the worm bin to drain. This is called worm juice. It's the liquid that you want to drain to keep it dry. A compost doesn't get stinky if it's kept dry. That's why composting toilets work because they separate the urine and the feces, right? With a worm bin, you can capture that juice, dilute it, and use it as a fertilizer for your tomatoes and fruiting plants. And then the castings that you get are a wonderful opportunity to fertilize your garden and to start seeds. If it gets stinky, it's because you're putting more in there than they have the capacity to eat. I like to rotationally graze my worms by dividing your worm bin into square feet and depositing your compost for the day into one of the squares. The next day you move over to the next square. By the time you get back to the first square, they should have completely consumed that. And if they haven't, you don't have enough worms or you're not giving them enough. Start another bin.
Good stuff. Yeah. And a related question here, is there some way to compost outside in the winter? Can you do worms in the winter?
Worms outside will die depending on where you are. Winter for me means minus 20, minus 30, sometimes minus 40. So your worms will die. They're not earthworms, the night crawlers that were imported from Europe. The big ones that you use for fishing will go deep into the soil. Red wrigglers actually stay towards the surface, and that's what makes them composting worms. They'll die. You definitely want to bring them in, at the very least, into a garage that stays a little bit above freezing. The better way to compost in the winter is just to have a compost pile. The laziest way to do it is cold composting. This is 3 pallets in a corner somewhere that's accessible from your kitchen. Don't put it too far, you'll never use it. Have access to carbonaceous material. Know what your carbon material is before you start composting, because otherwise you're just going to have a stinky mess, right? These green bins that municipalities give you, and you just dump your compost and they pick it up and throw it in. Oh, it's always gross, right? It's a ridiculous way to treat waste, actually. What we want to do is create a compost with a lot of carbon material, straw, hay, even newspaper, leaves, wood chips, right? These are carbonaceous materials that will absorb the excess nitrogen. So, rule of thumb in a compost, think of carbon as the diaper and the nitrogen, your food scraps, as the poop. If you have too much poop, not even the diaper can hold on to it.
Such vibrant imagery. I work with local and state governments to implement these types of programs in the community and in schools. If only our
Good
programs were
job.
this comprehensive and intuitive, they would be so much more successful. Thank you for sharing your expertise. I'm inspired by your work. Thank you for that comment.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's born of many mistakes and a lot of difficulty. So my hope is that you can expedite your program so that you don't have to go through as many of those failures. But again, as I mentioned earlier, failure is an indicator of success.
Another question here, and this brings us to the end of part two questions. Can I get a copy of the slides and the recording? Absolutely, you can. The slides, toolkit, and the recording link will be coming to you within 24 hours. So I guess your stuff is popular, Al. It's a good sign.
Great.
So now part three questions. Maybe we can bang out a few of these and get to the last part.
Sure.
How can I get more local customers in the community to buy from my farm?
Yeah, that's beyond the scope of this class. If there's a demand for farm marketing, or how do I actually treat my farm as a business? How do I sell my products? I do have some expertise to share there. It is beyond the scope of this program, but if there's a desire, send us an email. If there's enough interest, we'll put something together.
Yep, exactly. This is an interesting one here. 4 generations on my farm. Commercial farming has been going on almost all year round, the whole time, so the land's pretty devastated. It's only in the last 17 years or so that we started to bring holistic practices like permaculture. It's helping, but the soil still seems to be having a hard time despite many amendments, reintroduction of greenery. Any suggestions?
Oh, that's a very loaded question. And I'm going to give a very, if you've studied permaculture for 17 years, then you're already sick of hearing this answer. It depends. It requires thorough observation and interaction, and each system is uniquely complex. I couldn't hope to diagnose that via Zoom call. If you're interested in connecting with a practitioner or somebody that can really help you, there will be a cost associated to it, but I can certainly connect you.
Just reach out for follow-up and I'll give you the email at the end. What about summer break? I think they're serious. They want to know, but it's already in the presentation. You already answered that one. One more question here, and we can go to the last part. Any tips for organizing stakeholder meetings? In the past, the meetings that we've had were challenging to manage and to keep everyone on track.
Again, if there's interest in this sort of class, I'm happy to host it. I leverage a organizational structure called sociocracy. Take the time to Google that and do a bit of research. There's online courses that are available for not that much money. If you have an interest in learning that from Matt and I, we'd be happy to do that for you. But sociocracy essentially is a discussion method in which everybody is heard. It is beyond democracy in the sense that it's not a majority rules. In fact, there has to be 100% consensus in order to move forward on a decision, almost always. That involves compromise, but compromise is a part of life, and sociocracy honors this. There's a lot to talk about on sociocracy. So again, if there's interest in having a hangout with us about that, then we can talk about it.
Yeah, and we're quickly running out of time. So back to you, Al, and back to the program.
Too many slides left here. I'm going to go through how to build your actual garden now, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. Again, you'll have access to all of these slides. Let me know, Matt, that you can see everything.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, let's talk about building the educational garden program now for real. Creating a physical space where students can engage in hands-on learning is the foundational step of any garden program. What does the space look like? How do we build this space? Your space might look like this. This is actually the space of a friend of mine, Sean Dombrowski. He has an amazing YouTube channel called Edible Acres. You can check that out. Highly recommend. He runs a nursery from there. This space is wild, right? You have things that you might consider weeds. It doesn't necessarily look tidy. This kind of environment is beautiful for an educational garden program, and so is a square box divided into square feet. So the way that you build it really depends on your school's tolerance for wildness and your capacity to manage it. Your garden could look like this. This garden is certainly is beautiful. It would serve as an amazing playground for experimentation, but often a garden that looks like this is difficult to achieve in a school setting for a lot of reasons. But if you can build a natural space like this, I highly recommend it. One effective method for building an educational garden, and the one that I always recommend, is the square foot garden method. This approach is super adaptable, really simple to set up, and makes gardening accessible in any location. I talked to you about my parking lot case study, right? It's ideal for schools that have limited space because it utilizes small areas to really grow a diverse array of plants and maximizes literally every square inch in a space. For those of you who are in urban environments, I still use this method, this layout in all of my garden beds, at least my kitchen garden beds, the one closer to home, the ones that are the more intensive garden beds that I want to cultivate more closely. I want to maximize my space. So a square foot layout, even if you have a circular garden, is still super helpful just as a general rule. Using this method, you can easily divide it into manageable squares, which simplifies management and education. It allows students to learn about various plants and their needs while also maximizing limited space. For me, it's not the ultimate form of gardening. It's not the most biodiverse. It's not the most productive necessarily, but I think it's perfect for schools that are looking to implement a garden program without extensive land resources. This is what it looks like. Building it is really simple. Essentially, once the bed is construction and filled with soil, about at least 12 inches deep if you're on soil already, use string or twine along with a staple gun to divide the garden into individual square feet. Be sure to have the children participate in this. The building of the garden is a workshop in itself. Using these garden planning cards, you're going to know exactly how many seeds to place in each one of those square feet. And then, like I mentioned, each student can really take ownership over one of these square feet. So where do you put this thing, right? There's a lot I can talk about in terms of microclimate, solar exposure, albedo, heat island effect, all of these things. It's imperative that you choose the right location. However, barring the perfect location, use whatever you have. Even if it's almost always shaded, there's something you can grow. There are deep, dark, leafy greens that, albeit they'll grow a little bit slower, still thrive in a shady location. Spinach, Swiss chard, these are options as well. You don't want to put fruiting plants in a shady area, they'll never go to fruit. Look for a spot that gets plenty of sunlight. Eastern sun is the best. Morning sun is always the best. Western sun in the middle of the summer will cook your garden and make it require more watering. So if you can shelter it from the western sun and get mostly a southeast exposure, that's the Goldilocks zone for sure. You want to avoid a north-facing wall or a straight west-facing wall unless you're growing things like rosemary, tomatoes, Mediterranean plants that can stand being dried out and have a lot of sun beating down on them. Ideally, you're placing your garden close to water, right? This is an important factor. The best is rainwater, but if all you have is a hose, that's fine. Don't go into a place that's prone to waterlogging, right? If it's a very low area and you're noticing a lot of water in the ground after it rains, it doesn't dry too much, or it dries out way too fast and cracks, you want to avoid those places or try to amend them in whatever way you can. You want to place your garden, if possible, away from busy roads to minimize pollution exposure and to ensure safety for your students. Consider your surrounding environment, right? Avoid really dense tree areas so that you're minimizing nutrient competition and potential wildlife disturbances. Now, I talk about edge and biodiversity. Be reasonable with this. We're not looking to chop all the trees down. We still want to view the ecosystem as a whole. And as it pertains to building the garden, host a workshop. It's a great opportunity where older students and parent volunteers come together. When it comes to actual garden beds, raised garden beds with wood, a good place to start if you're looking for specifics, and this is going to depend on your context, start by 3 raised beds. 3 raised beds is a great place to start for 2 or 3 classrooms. Each classroom can have its own garden bed, or you can have more for one class, whatever your situation is. And go 3 by 8 feet. 3 feet is a great width because every student can reach a foot and a half into the center from either side, and about a foot high if you're starting with a grassy area. If you have hard pavement or really not nice soil underneath, aim for twice as high. Go at least 2 feet. You can go up to 4 feet tall. Then you're getting a little bit tall for some of the younger kids. And of course, you're going to require more fill. A trick for that is to use rotting logs and things to put at the bottom. But the best case scenario is to really lay cardboard at the base on the inside to soak that cardboard to choke out any weeds and to invite in, and then filling that with soil that is rich in organic matter. Assign each bed to different groups for the season. For materials, I'll talk about that here in a moment. You want to use cedar or other rot-resistant lumber, right? Now you use what you have access to. The lifespan of your garden will depend on the material that you use for the wood because it's going to get wet, obviously. And then the schools you're working with should probably provide essential tools like wheelbarrows, shovels, watering cans, right? And then involve students in the building process, which, as I mentioned, is an educational experience in and of itself. So it looks very simple. These are just pieces of wood stacked on top of each other, 2 by 4s, or sometimes 2 by 6s. So if you're doing it 12 inches tall, you're going to use 2 2 by 6s. You stack those on top of each other and you use some simple corner brackets. So we build the first layer, install the corner brackets, attach them with some screws on the ends, and then build the second layer and attach the top part of the bracket to that. You have a completed bed. You should be able to lift that. It'll be quite heavy. Put it wherever you need it to be, ensure that it's square, and you're good to go. This is an image of me working with some students in one of our workshops. Now, I'm not going to give you specific costs because they vary by location, but I'll give you some general tips and they're listed here. If you can, try to get some locally milled lumber. Unplaned is great. You don't need perfectly smooth lumber for this. Certainly avoid treated lumber. I know it's not going to rot, but it contains substances that are really poisonous for the soil, and you don't want to pollute your soil with the oils that they put on there. Or some rough cut lumber, that's great. Even rough cut pine, it'll rot after a couple of years, but if that's what you have access to, as long as it's thick enough, it should work just fine, and then you can replace it later. Soil and delivery, it's a way to cut cost if you can get your own soil. Where I'm from, we had access to free compost from the municipal landfill. It wasn't the best quality, but it was free. We would go and acquire that. Oftentimes, compost providers will donate in exchange for some recognition. If you have a teacher or a parent volunteer, somebody that has a pickup truck or a trailer, they're a valuable resource. That's something that you might spend a bit of money on. You don't need weed barrier, but if you'd like to use geotextile, if you really want to ensure that you have some weed prevention because you can't maintain it very much, you can do that. I usually try to avoid it and just plant densely and let that form the cover that avoids weeds altogether. And hardware, which the brackets and the screws. Now, if you really want to save cost, this is a garden bed that I created out of milled hemlock slabs. These are pieces of hemlock from a mill. It's essentially a waste product for these folks. This is not a beautiful piece of architecture, but it works. It's four corners together. You can build your garden this way, fill it with soil, and it'll be sturdy enough and last a long time. If you're okay with that natural look, kids peeling bark as it slowly peels off the wood, that sort of thing, this is an excellent example of a cost-effective garden construction. This is called lasagna gardening. Essentially, it's just putting layers of cardboard and soaking it before you put your compost and stuff on top. So you would put this at the base of your garden bed, right at the base here, and you would soak that very good. Okay, so let's just wrap this up by talking about how to adapt your program for other contexts. Again, my daughter Cheyenne here on the left with her little hat. She's much, much bigger than that. But by the way, just to double click on this image, this is an event, a public garden, a public food garden that we planted in a median strip in front of a fire station downtown. A very public space, people walking by there all the time. There's a sign that said free food. And we were hosting educational events there throughout the year. After school programs, they're a fantastic opportunity to extend the impact of your garden beyond regular school hours. You can relax informal settings where students can continue to engage with the garden. A little bit of flexibility for after school sessions allows for some variety of activities that might not fit into the regular school day. Gardening might just be a welcome component of that. As I mentioned earlier, I worked a lot with a Boys and Girls Club. This is a publicly available photo, which is why I felt comfortable posting it. Usually I don't like to post photos of students or children that I work with without permission, of course. But this is a newspaper clipping. This is an educational garden that we built at the Boys and Girls Club. This was an after-school program that we worked on. The kids looked forward to getting off the bus after school and engaging with the garden to see what was growing and how it was performing. And many of the kids actually rushed over to the garden to see how it was going every day. Preschool programs are great. I worked a little bit with preschool programs, but younger kids love this sort of thing. Now, there's a couple considerations. Safety, right? We want to use safe tools. We want to use non-toxic plants. Tomato leaves, for example. Most children know intuitively they won't put it in their mouths because it has a smell. If they taste it, it'll be very bitter. They'll spit it out. Just being wary of the types of plants that exist, whether they're thorny or not. This is where tactile play has a lot of benefit, right? Children touching seeds. Oftentimes, I would conduct workshops for kindergartners and preschoolers and things, and it would be about manipulating the seeds and feeling the difference between a beet seed and a spinach seed, which has all these little spikes on it. And why is the seed bigger, I wonder? And feel the soil and feel this plant and feel this leaf. Which one feels harder? Which one is easier to rip? And all of these little pieces, these tactile observations are incredibly beautiful. The garden is a wonderful place to play, which makes it great for preschool programs and daycares. Summer camps give you an extended time frame for delving deeper into gardening projects. These can be pretty impactful if you combine educational activities with the fun and freedom of summer. Just make gardening part of the summer experience. You can get watermelons out of it, which is pretty cool. Church groups are great partners for your garden program. They give you the space to link gardening with your spiritual and community values, exchanging that spiritual and cultural capital and social capital. Oftentimes, churches are hubs of community, so they are great places for community garden programs. If you bring your children to church, it would be a great place to host events as well in the garden, right? And the market garden context. So if you're a market gardener by chance, or somebody who runs a farm, or you're somebody who's interested in doing that, whether you're an urban farmer or not, you might adapt the educational garden program for the market garden. We did this at one high school where the agricultural program is a rural school. They wanted to learn small scale market gardening. So we built an educational garden program that resembled a hyper efficient market garden so they could simulate small scale farming, but also teach elements of the curriculum while doing so. And it might look something like this. It's not a standardized rows. Still a lot of diversity, but a lot of deep mulch that conserves moisture. But still, you can calculate how many tomatoes you might get. You can calculate how much carrots you might get. Homeschool cooperatives, same thing. I am a homeschooler. A lot of times we want to collaborate with other homeschool families. And the benefit of homeschooling is that you're at home, so you can do stuff like this, right? This is me and my family creating a meal out of what came out of the garden. You can do other things like make bread. You can start seeds in your windowsill and really incorporate gardening into your family life. Community garden programs. I did a lot of work with social housing programs, community garden programs, teaching children in community garden programs how to grow food, bringing students out to farms and homesteads in order to observe what gardening might look like at a larger scale. This is Farmer Brian, who was a berry farmer, and he hosted students that we brought out to his farm more than once. There was a lot of reciprocity there because he had a few extra hands on deck for a day, and they got to participate with a lot of tactile experiential learning. There's a wonderful opportunity to observe nature in these systems as well. So we've explored essential steps for initiating and adapting your educational garden program. We talked about building the physical garden space to raise funds. I'd like to think you now have the tools and strategies to create a resilient and impactful garden program, but of course, this is just the start. Conclude this entire session by saying, I guess I want to leave you a message of inspiration and encouragement, if you'll allow me to. I'm hoping in the last couple of hours you've learned a lot about building and sustaining an educational garden. And now I just want to emphasize that it's time to put these lessons into action because there's no point in me delivering this educational program if we're not doing that. Now, if you're serious about this, and if you stay to the end, I have to assume that you are, know that the work that you're about to undertake is incredibly important. Okay, so by creating educational garden, you're not just planting seeds in the soil, you're planting seeds in the hearts and minds of the next generation. These gardens are where young people learn about the natural world, where they develop a deep connection to the earth, where they begin to understand their role as stewards of our planet. Imagine the impact of a child discovering the joy of growing their own food, understanding the cycles of nature, feeling the pride of nurturing life from a tiny seed to this thriving plant. I can tell you firsthand that these experiences are transformative. They inspire curiosity, foster responsibility, and they cultivate a lifelong love for learning and nature. Education is intended to be a powerful catalyst for change. Through your garden program, you really have the opportunity to inspire, to educate the next generation of land stewards, right? You're empowering them with the knowledge and skills they need to care for our planet, take agency over their own well-being, and contribute to a healthier, more resilient world. Every lesson you teach, every plant you grow, every child you inspire brings us one step closer to a better future where our communities are connected through a shared love of nature, where regenerative practices are the norm, not the exception, where every individual understands the importance of their role in stewarding the ecosystems in which they find themselves. So, my hope for you is that you take what you've learned here and bring it to life in your garden. Engage your students, involve your community, and let your passion for education and nature shine through in everything you do. Your efforts are going to create a ripple effect. They're going to inspire others and build a movement that extends far beyond the garden gates. Thank you for your dedication to this important work. Together, I'm confident that we can inspire the next generation of land stewards and create a brighter, more resilient future for all. Happy gardening, and remember, the garden is more than just a place to grow plants. It's a place to grow minds, to build community, and to make the world a darn better place. I'll leave it at that. Ooh, that's a cool background. Check that out.
Sad, brother. I found that as you were speaking. It looks like the timer's still going. We'll have to figure that one out. Anyway, well done. I can't believe how you articulate these things so well. The imagery, your experiences, it really came together nicely for a holistic picture from my perspective. Executed and well done, brother. That was inspirational to say the least.
Thanks, Matt.
And as promised, folks, we can get to all your questions that we're going over, but if you can stick around for just a couple more minutes, we'll fulfill our promise of answering all the questions. Some of these are more comments than anything. I love the idea of a school garden produce in the cafeteria, but I'm not sure where I would even start with that.
Speak to your administration. Oftentimes, schools have partnerships and contracts with third parties who bring in really not good foods and cook in really not good seed oils. That's very much an uphill battle. But if you're anything like me, that's not going to stop you.
Yeah, that school garden giveaway was lovely. I totally agree with that. That was nice, that part too.
Lead with
That,
love.
yeah, absolutely. So that was all the questions for part three. And then part four, we had three left. The first one was, can I come live with Sean in the wild garden? Yeah, absolutely. I want to join you. Looks like the Garden of Eden, they said.
Yep, I agree.
We'll all go move there.
Yeah.
Such a nice garden, though. Is it okay to use pressure-treated lumber for the beds? You answered that, and the answer was
Don't
no.
do
Do
it.
not use untreated rough cut lumber, I think you said, right? Or
No hardwood.
hardwood.
So Oak is often better used for a table. Walnut is often better used for a shelf. Black locust is an exception. It's like a hard softwood, lasts for a very long time. Cedar is the best. You can get away with spruce or pine, but it'll rot faster. You'll have to replace the boards.
Yeah, that was all of our questions. And then I just had one note here that I saw a sticker one time on a truck that said, "Sorry, I'm helping someone move." I saw that. That was hilarious.
Yeah, of course.
Al, any closing remarks or final words for us?
I just want to thank everybody for joining this live. I know it was an intimate session, but I'm always grateful to see the passion that we have collectively, not just for gardening or our environment, but at the core for our youth, for our children, for the next generation. And that's what this work is all about. We heal the land for them, not just for ourselves. Thank you for being champions of that, whoever you are. If you're listening to this as a recording, I have infinite gratitude for you.
Well said. And on that note, I just want to thank you, Al, for your awesome presentation. It's left a good impact on me, and I'm sure with a lot of people that are watching. So thank you for that. It's been an incredible evening, really. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and your great questions. We'll get all that stuff out to you within 24 hours. So the recording link, the slide deck, and Al's complete digital toolkit. You'll have the planning guides, the 50 plus lesson plans, funding resources, and all kinds of stuff. So everything you need to start your 2024 school garden journey. And a big thanks also to our sponsors today, Rapid Course Company, Learn Regen, Maple Grove Productions, and Replay Kit for sponsoring tonight's event. Thank you very much for that. And to the audience for attending and all your awesome questions. If anybody needs some additional information, we've got our contact email up on the screen. If you're interested in any of our services, please reach out, info@maplegrove.tech, and we can direct your inquiry to wherever it needs to go. And that'll do it, folks. That's a wrap. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and happy gardening in 2025.
Thanks,
And
everyone. Thanks, Matt. You're a great producer. Appreciate that.
I'm happy to help.
Cheers.
Take care.